Imagine a world where night never comes, where the shadows whisper your secrets and the stars seemingly watch your every move. Have you ever wondered what happens when you fall asleep? Fasten your seatbelts, for we are about to embark on a thrilling journey through the darkest corners of the human soul. It was an early morning fog, damp and cold outside. A girl of about 12 was staring sleepily at a cow slowly walking ahead of her. Since the first days of vacation, she had this responsible duty, to take the cow to the herd in the morning and bring it home in the evening. They used to have a clever cow, Zorka, who left and came home by herself and was affectionate. Alas, Zorka had outlived her time. Young Vesna has not yet mastered, and was frightened of every rustle, could run away to the fields or confuse the houses. That's why the girl went with the cow in the morning and in the evening. On vacation, she wanted to sleep, and not drag 3 kilometers to the paddock where the herd gathered. After seeing Zorka off, she wandered home, dreaming of warm milk and cookies. Her parents and grandmother had already gone to work and would be back late, and she still had chores to do. Everything like adults. In her thoughts, the girl did not notice how she turned off the usual path. She froze in fright. Her feet brought her to a forbidden place. Adults did not allow children to walk and play there. It was dangerous. The place was remarkable. A small mound, from which springs flowed, there grew unusual flowers the color of blood, and often found stones of a very strange kind. One such stone was kept at the girl's home, supposedly once her uncle had brought it from the mound. The stone resembled a multi-layered cake. All the layers were different colors, and its composition resembled hard glass. They tried to break it. They failed. Not even a crack appeared. At the foot of the mound grew willow trees, many, a whole grove. There the girl noticed a strange dark heap. It was hard to see in the fog. She came closer, thinking that it was probably someone who had thrown away his coat, though it was strange. It wasn't a pile, but a person. The first thought that flashed through the child's mind was to run home, and the second was, what if help is needed and she's gone? And after all, she's 12, an adult, she should help. She cautiously approached the man lying face down. She didn't recognize who it was from the clothes, only that it was a woman. "Are you all right?" The girl pulled the woman lying on the ground by the shoulder. The next second, there was a scream of horror. This face, twisted with fear, with bulging eyes and a blue complexion, would haunt the girl for years to come. The girl ran as hard as she could, and only when she saw the women going to work she screamed, and an hour later the village was swarming with police. 30 years later. The marshrutka raced through the village as if it wanted to win a rally. The driver, a young guy, was listening to music loudly, chatting on the phone with someone and not listening to the passengers. After skidding to a stop, a pretty woman leaned over the back of the seat to the driver. "Stop! Passed!" she yelled. "Oh, sorry, God, where do they make you like this, just like everybody else? Shall I tell you how?" The driver didn't stay in debt. "Fuck you." The woman pulled out her bag and slammed the door shut. The driver just grinned, turned up the music and drove off. With a heavy sigh, she wandered down the scratched path. It had been so many years and the paths had never been resurfaced. She'd walked here as a child and remembered all the potholes and bumps which had only gotten bigger now. She had to walk a whole block with a heavy bag. Swearing through her teeth, she reached her house. She was unpleasantly struck by the almost bare street. Old trees had been cut down, no new ones had been planted, and it looked very bleak. Even the old walnut tree where the swing used to hang had been cut down, and not even a stump was left. "Anfisa, is that you?" a woman's voice called out to her. "Hi, I've arrived," the woman replied, fiddling with the gate, which would not budge. "Will you sell?" inquired the neighbor. "Yul, what do you want?" "I'm just asking, the house is good, strong, and the plot is big, the garden is not bad, but it's old, and you know everything as always." "Well, it was nice to meet you." Anfisa finally managed to open the gate and slipped into the yard. "See you later." Yes, the yard is overgrown, the paint is peeling, and in general it looks neglected and uninhabited. Although on the other hand, no one has lived here for almost 10 years. At one time relatives lived here, then a cousin while he was building his house. But without a real owner, the house dies. There was a lot of work to be done. What will she do with the house? She has not yet decided. It so happened that her grandmother bequeathed the house to her, and the other grandchildren bypassed. There were disgruntled sisters, but then calmed down, because no one wanted to deal with the house. Anfisa didn't need the house either. She had an apartment in the city, just like her parents. And now her parents lived abroad, they would return in a year. The woman herself had difficulties in her life. A crisis on all fronts, so to speak. All events were unfolding so quickly that she did not have time to react, she could not even comprehend and accept them. It all started with a little thing, a scratch on her car. Then came the trouble at work, and then came the news about her husband's new girlfriend. All the beautiful and cozy life ended at once. Anfisa was left with a broken heart, and without a job, where to live was. Her ex-husband gave a good payoff that Fisa would not rock the scandal. The woman was so dumbfounded by the events that she silently agreed and wrote all the documents, and soon she learned about the layoffs in the company where she worked. Yes, she received all the payments and money was the last thing she needed. It seemed to Anfisa that her life, like a crystal vase, shattered into millions of shards. She wanted peace both physically and mentally. The village where she had spent her childhood and youth seemed to her the best way out. She would put the house in order, maybe she would take care of the vegetable garden, take walks and rest. And then it would be seen, she did not look that far. The woman wanted to collect the fragments of her life and glue them back together, at least try, and she met her neighbor Yulka on the first day. Fisa finished school here and she realized that she would meet a lot of acquaintances and classmates. So with Yulka, they studied in the same class, went for walks, and then to discos. After school, their paths diverged so that they almost did not communicate. After high school, Yulia went to college and worked at her native school as a cook. She married quickly, gave birth to one-year-old children, and did not work. Her husband did something to support the family, but Yulia was not satisfied. Everything was not enough for her. The first days in the native house, Anfisa was engaged in prolonged cleaning. Long because she froze endlessly over old photos, books, postcards, and even her grandmother's dishes. Grandma is long gone from this world and her clear green glass salad bowl still stands. Crystal salad bowls and glass shot glasses and goblets were mixed up in an empty cupboard. Rinsing the dishes, Anfisa smiles. In the days of distant childhood it was ceremonial dishes. Now by the way, this style is very fashionable. Having licked the house and yard to a shine, she even managed to paint the gate. The woman cooked food and lay down in the house to rest. During these days she was tired, but it was a pleasant rest and there were no thoughts. One day, waking up early in the morning, Anfisa decided to take a walk to the places of her childhood. In spite of the middle of June, in the morning there was usually a thick fog that crawled up from the river. Her feet led her to the mound by themselves. From memory she found a spring, along the banks of which grew unusual scarlet flowers that looked like tiny tulips, only with velvet petals. Suddenly she felt dizzy and heard a humming sound, and it was coming from the grove. Anfisa staggered and almost fell down, settled on the ground. With difficulty she reached the stream and washed herself, drank cold water. For a moment it seemed to her that someone was standing in the grove. But no, it just seemed so. The feeling of someone else's gaze in her back didn't go away, it was creepy. As she walked away, she looked back every now and then. The unpleasant sensation didn't go away until evening. Having had supper, she went to bed. Anfisa woke up from the cold. Her nightgown was wet with night dew, her bare feet were tickled by the grass. In utter amazement, Fisa looked around. She was lying at the foot of the mound on the grass. How had she gotten here in the first place? Still unable to find a coherent answer, she wandered home. In the morning, sitting with a mug of coffee at the table, the woman's thoughts went back to that fateful day, many years ago. Leafing through an old album, Fisa came across pictures of her in the company of girls. Yes, a lot of water had passed since then. She remembered them all by name. "And you're Nastya, the witch's granddaughter," Fisa smiled, looking at the girl with a smart look and a funny pigtail. "Where are you?" And Fisa went to the main village gossip bureau, to Yulka. In an hour, she knew all the news about Nastya and her life, and on a sheet of paper she had written down her phone number and address in sprawling handwriting. Nastya lived at her grandmother's house, not far from the mound. She was going to talk to her, find out the details. This story had been bothering her for years. It took her about an hour to get to the right house. There was never any public transportation, either on her own feet or personal transportation from bicycle to auto. But Fisa was even glad of the long walk. "Nastya, hi Anfisa, I heard you're back. Come in, I see you're here on business." Sleepless. That's what the villagers called him. He was here long before the first settlers of this land. Once there was a defensive fortress on this place. Gradually the settlement grew and turned into a big village. They spoke of the Awake One in whispers and always before sunset. It was said that he dwells at the foot of the mound in the willow grove, which is on the edge of a large stream. In the mound, allegedly, is the tomb of a certain creature that brings misfortune, death, famine, and pestilence. The demon is imprisoned in this dungeon by an ancient spell. The Sleepless One guards the entrance and prevents mere mortals from entering the mound. According to legend, there is a secret entrance hidden behind the water. The tomb holds untold treasures. The entrance is hidden by 7 enchanted seals. When the last one is broken, the demon will leave his dungeon. The Sleepless One is also a demon, only he has his own agenda. But people are trying hard to get to the tomb. For several hundred years of the history of the village, there were many daredevils. No one survived after meeting with the Sleepless One. Today's youth never believe the older generation, and the story of not sleeping is considered to be a fairy tale. Whatever the case, all children were instilled with fear of the mound and the grove, not to even think of playing and walking there. Of course, there were those who were happy to disobey the adults, but everything was avoided. The legend was covered with speculations and fictions. It seemed to be an absolute fiction. They really believed in it and in its existence. Only a few people stayed awake. Once, many years ago, a girl found a dead man at the foot of a mound on the edge of a grove. It was a woman in terrible shape. The doctor's subsequent report of the cause of death was that she had died of great fear, and the girl who found the body was Anfisa. Fisa remembered almost nothing now, only scraps of memories surfaced sometimes. The day she had found the corpse, she had been hysterical. She had been so scared. After that, she began to stutter a little when she was worried. They took her to the city, first to one doctor, then another. It was no use. Anfisa went from a cheerful child to a frightened creature. "Your doctors won't help her. I'll deal with it myself," said Fisa's grandmother gloomily. The next day, they went to visit her friend on the other side of the village. Only later, Anfisa learned that she was a witch doctor. Some people called her a witch. She performed a ritual over the child, pouring out fright, and then made Anfisa forget everything. That's what happened. A memory seal helps seal the terrible memories that keep you from living. So Anfisa forgot that day and Sleepless. "Do you think your grandmother sealed my memory?" Anfisa sat across from Nastya at the table. The witch's granddaughter turned away, looking out the window. Yes, her grandmother had once sealed her memories of the terrible thing, and now it was necessary to break the seal and find out what Anfisa had seen that morning. Who else was there? The women agreed to perform the ritual that night and break the seal, and then think about what to do. Maybe the memories would provide clues to Anfisa's sudden sleepwalking. How did she end up at the mound at night? Anfisa went to the neighboring street through the vegetable garden, afraid of Yulka, a big fan of peeping and eavesdropping. In principle, it's always been like that. People don't change. It took her half an hour to get to Nastya's house. In her childhood, this house seemed to her a scary house of Baba Yaga, a wilderness. However, not much had changed. "Come in, don't be afraid." Nastya was already waiting for her in the summer kitchen. She had rebuilt the tiny house and turned it into an office and a small kitchen with a stove. A witch's kitchen. Anfisa grinned. Nastya sat the woman in the middle of the room on a chair, took a thick candle with wormwood and ruta, a bowl of water. Anfisa's head was spinning like a merry-go-round. She could see almost nothing in front of her, sinking into a viscous darkness. Nastya waxed negative and spoilage to make it easier to remove the seal. After waxing, she gave Fisa a break. "You okay?" "Dizzy, it'll pass. You ready to go?" "Yes." Like a dry peel from an onion broke the seal off Nastya's memory. A sharp, bright flash in her head made Anfisa groan in pain. Bright spots and sparks flashed before her eyes. Suddenly the woman groaned. The groan turned into a scream and howl. She fell to the floor and curled up in a fetal position. Memories came flooding back. Nastya knew that it would be painful and difficult. The main thing was not to overload the nervous system and not to go crazy. The wall clock ticked loudly, counting down the minutes. Anfisa was lying on the floor. Nastya did not dare to touch her. "Drink," Fisa asked quietly. "What did you see?" Nastya handed her a mug. "I need to digest everything. Maybe your grandmother was right to seal the memories. Will you tell me?" "Yes, help me up, my legs are shaking." Anfisa warmed her hands on a mug of herbal tea. Nastya sat silently, waiting. She didn't want to rush her. "That afternoon I took the cow to the herd. The fog had not yet lifted, though it was almost dawn. At Hot Alley, which leads to the creek and the mound, I saw a childish figure jump out of the alley and rush out. Honestly, I didn't even get a good look at whether it was a boy or a girl. Why did I go there? Out of curiosity, I guess. What was a child doing there so early? And where did he run off to? I saw a pile, like a coat or something similar lying around. I was looking from a distance. I came closer, all the troubles of childish curiosity. And there was a dead body, a woman. I knew she was dead right away. The living don't have such a face. Imagine, I froze and looked at her. Out of the corner of my eye I caught the crowns of the willows. The grove was stirring, as if there was a strong wind, but there was no wind, and the sound, like dry branches breaking one by one. Suddenly I was so scared, horror gripped me, I couldn't move. There was someone standing in the grove, tall, dark. He was looking at me. And you know, it was like time stood still, frozen. I look at the corpse again and she's looking at me. She's looking at me. And then it was like I was spellbound. I ran out of there and you know the rest. You don't recognize the baby now? I see Grandma sealed your memories and you didn't remember that moment, Nastya asked. I recognized it, Anfisa answered with a sigh. Remember, the Stepanovs lived near the mill. Their daughter was in my class. She was quiet and unnoticeable. After that incident with me, Stepanova didn't come to school on September 1st. I don't know where she went. Her name was Tanya. I know who you mean. Even though I'm a year older, I remember your class. Her too. You're right, she was so quiet that no one even noticed her absence. Nastya rubbed her match thoughtfully. She came back not so long ago. I saw her at the store. I think she works there. There's a store next to the house where her sister used to live. Her parents are gone. She hasn't been back that long. Out of curiosity, I asked her shifter if it was really Tatiana. It turned out yes. And then I didn't bother to ask. I had my hands full. Maybe she was sent away because she was scared too, or in a hospital for the mentally ill. Kids have a weak psyche. We're not guessing, although you could have thrown your cards. Let's go to her and ask her what she was doing there. Yeah, she'll tell you so, Nastya grinned. You go home and I'll throw the cards and see. Cold and scared, fear literally chained her. Anfisa sat up on the bed with a jerk, her heart skipping beats from the unpleasant sensation. She didn't understand what it was that had scared her so much in the dream. A bright moon peeked through the window, shining like an electric lamp. A vague thought moved in Anfisa's mind. She got dressed, grabbed the lantern, and left the house. Sometimes moonlight helps, but on this night the moon was not on the woman's side. Sneakingly she reached the alley. In a few minutes she was standing by the largest and oldest willow tree on the bank. From here a path snaked upward to the mound. Anfisa had never been here since that memorable day, but it seemed to her that nothing had changed in the intervening years. Suddenly there came a wind that nearly knocked her off her feet. Strange, she muttered, looking at the crowns of the trees. The crowns stood unmoving, as if there was no wind. Definitely a cursed place. Out of the corner of her eye she noticed a movement at the side, among the trees. Anfisa stopped, trying to get a closer look. Something large and shapeless stood behind the trees. An icy fear gripped the woman. She couldn't see who it was, but she could feel the danger and the cold. Indeed, even the bark of the trees was covered with a thick layer of frost. Before her eyes, the grove was turning into the realm of the Snow Queen. Anfisa couldn't move, only whispered with blue-tinged lips. Sleepless, I am not with evil. I don't need anything. I just want to know the truth. Forgive me for coming without permission, for not asking permission. I'm sorry I didn't bring gifts. Anfisa whispered and whispered, cursing herself for her stupidity. She had been so stupid, and Nastya had told her so. Her body felt as if it had been electrocuted and she swayed but stayed on her feet. Her heart whimpered unpleasantly and then let go. The cold disappeared just as suddenly. She was enveloped in the summer night air, the leaves of the trees rustling quietly. Anfisa exhaled with relief, but she didn't dare go through the grove, and instead of returning the same way, she followed the path to the mound. There was no need for a flashlight. The moon illuminated the path perfectly. Suddenly she noticed someone rummaging in the tall grass. She looked closely. Tanya was digging something with a small folding shovel. What was she looking for? Anfisa did not give away her presence and silently watched from the dense tall grass. Fear was gone, but a morbid curiosity remained. The scraping of the shovel on the metal made Anfisa wince. What was she looking for? The woman had to sit, almost without moving, for a couple of hours until Tanya finally got out of there. After waiting a little more time, she walked over to where Tanya had been digging. A couple minutes, dirty hands, and there was the result. A strange plaque with unfamiliar signs. It was dug tightly into the ground, the size of a palm, made of dark metal. Anfisa had seen similar plaques in some museums. What was it wondering? From there, Anfisa went straight to Nastya's house. The time was approaching morning, and she hoped that her friend would not chase her away. It turned out that Nastya was already doing chores and was just coming with a hoe. "Why are you so early?" Nastya asked, seeing her friend. "You have no face on you. What are you doing up, in summer?" Nastya laughed out loud. "Who in the village sleeps in the summer? We always have plenty of work, not in the vegetable garden but in the farm, in the house. There's a lot of work. But you didn't come to help in the vegetable garden. What happened?" Anfisa told everything in detail. The witch listened silently, occasionally nodding her head. "I threw the cards last night. I wanted to look through them. And you know what?" "What?" "I got nervous, don't tell me." "What you found was a seal. It's one of 7, and Tanya's looking for them." "So? I told you about the seals and the sleepless one." Nastya shook her head reproachfully. "I remember that, and of course my classmate didn't collect daisies." "I have an idea, I'll tell you, and you think how it can be done." The conversation dragged on, and Anfisa returned home for dinner, where she went straight to bed. She woke up at about 7 in the evening. The sun was going down. Having cleaned herself up, she sat down on the veranda to wait for Nastya. Sveta purposely did not light up so that the neighbor did not notice her and did not come to visit. Yulia had no shyness at all, and guests were not a good time. She sat there until it was dark when Nastya knocked quietly on the gate. Anfisa told everything in detail. The witch listened silently, occasionally nodding her head. "I threw the cards last night. I wanted to look through them. And you know what?" "What?" "I got nervous, don't tell me." "What you found was a seal. It's one of 7, and Tanya's looking for them." "So? I told you about the seals and the sleepless one." Nastya shook her head reproachfully. "I remember that. And of course my classmate didn't collect daisies. I have an idea, I'll tell you, and you think how it can be done." The conversation dragged on, and Anfisa returned home for dinner, where she went straight to bed. She woke up at about 7 in the evening. The sun was going down. Having cleaned herself up, she sat down on the veranda to wait for Nastya. Sveta purposely did not light up, so that the neighbor did not notice her and did not come to visit. Yulia had no shyness at all, and guests were not a good time. She sat there until it was dark, when Nastya knocked quietly on the gate. "Yulka has always been like that since she was a child, a nosy gossip," Fisa said, trying to keep up with Nastya. Nastya walked with long strides, as if she were late for something. "You just didn't notice it when you were a child," answered Nastya. "I was teased a lot as a child, even beaten a couple of times." "Why?" Fisa was surprised. "I don't remember anything like that. For my grandmother. They called me a witch. They broke a couple of windows. There were a lot of things. Our people are strange. When the witch needs help, everyone comes screaming for help. That's it. Here we are." Nastya stopped abruptly. This time they took a different route to the grove, through the old cemetery. No one had been buried there for a long time. Everything was overgrown with lilacs. Some graves had fallen through or grown into the ground. Nastya navigated the cemetery well and knew the short path. At the entrance, she asked for protection and help from the mistress, left her gifts, and they went on quietly.